It's the beginning of October and we just had balance changes 2 or 3 days ago, so it is time for another tier list where I rank every single card in Clash Royale. As you guys know, S tier is the highest tier, meaning the card is very strong. It either needs a nerf or it's just extremely versatile. A is above average by a good amount. B is on the upper end of average. C is right around average, maybe on the lower end. D means the card is below average or not that versatile. And F means the card is trash and either needs a buff or it's just hardly used in any deck. So starting off here with the archers, I'm going to say right now they're D tier because for the most part, the archers are only good inside of Expo, and Expo itself isn't even that strong in the meta. Arrows are going in A tier. There's a lot of different decks you could use them in, whether it's Lava Hound, a Bridge Spam deck, a Mortar deck, and they're just very good against things like Bait and also a bunch of air cards, and they just take up a lot of space, so they're just a very consistent spell overall. The Baby Dragon I'm going to say is C tier because it's primarily used inside a Splash Yard, and it's not used in too many decks besides that, but it's a good splash card for only 4 elixir. The balloon right now I actually think is A tier. It's one of the strongest win conditions in the game. I think it's one of the main reasons why Lava got nerfed. The balloon didn't end up getting a nerf, so I still think it's going to remain very strong the next couple months as one of the current best win conditions in the game. The bandit is B tier right now. Even though P.E.K.K.A might not be amazing, the bandit is still used in other decks outside of P.E.K.K.A, like with the battle ram and the evolved barbarians, and she can be really difficult to deal with if you don't have the correct counters in cycle. The barbarian barrel is going in A with the arrows. It's very good inside of heavier decks like Golem, Electro Giant, things along those lines, and Splash Yard finished #1 in the world last season, which is a deck that has the barbarian barrel in it. Just gets a lot of value for only 2 elixir, can be used offensively as well as defensively. The barbarian hut's going in trash. Not too much to say here except, spells like Earthquake and the poison just kill it so easily and it doesn't really get a lot of value. Like I did with the last couple tier lists, the evolutions I'm doing at the end, so keep in mind these are just the regular barbarians, not the evolved. They're gonna go in C tier, just average. The barbarians themselves, not evolved, are pretty good on defense, but stuff like fireball and splash cards kill them pretty easily. Same with the bats. These are the regular bats going in B tier. They are insane inside of minor wall breakers and one of kind of the key cards in that deck, but because they're not using many other decks outside of it, they're not going to be much higher than B. The healer is going in F. She's just not good at all, and what's funny is a lot of the Elixir Golem decks that are good right now don't even have the healer in it, so she's not even needed inside of Elixir Golem anymore. You could argue the Battle Ram is B right now, but I'm still going to put it in C just because there's so many buildings that are prevalent in the meta, which kind of stop it right in its tracks. The Bomber I'm going to say is D. It really fell out of the meta. It's not even really used in Golem or Drill that much anymore. You see it from time to time in a new lava deck, but that's about it. Even after the nerf, I'm still seeing a ton of bomb towers, so for that reason, I'm going to put it in A tier, and I think in this meta, it's still going to be used a lot because there's going to be a lot of people running Recruit Hogs. The Bowler's going in C tier. Some casual players might even say it's a D or an F tier card, but if used properly paired with the Tornado, especially on defense and things like Graveyard and Lumberloon Freeze, he can be quite solid, and he just has so much health. The Cannon card's also going in C, kind of like the Bowler. I don't think it's necessarily a bad card. It's just in the current meta, it hasn't really found a spot inside of it. It's good in Drill Bridge Spam, though. Cannon right now is B tier. I still think the Bomb Tower is slightly better, but the Cannon as a building, of course, is going to be pretty valuable for only 3 elixir. Very good inside of hog decks especially. I'm going to say the clone is F tier right now. Even Lava Clone is pretty much unviable because of all the tornado and the poison in the meta, so Clone just kind of sucks. The Dark Prince is B tier. I think it's pretty decent right now, especially with the rise of Goblin Giant decks that we've been seeing, and the Dark Prince pairs very well with the Goblin Giant. I'm going to say the Dark Goblin is C now because I don't really see the Dark Goblin much at the moment besides in the occasional Log Bait Rascal deck. Earthquake is B tier. I think it doesn't quite make A due to the fact that you pretty much can only run the Earthquake with the Hog Rider. You don't even really see it that much with the Royal Hogs anymore, so it just doesn't synergize well in too many decks. But in Hog decks, it's amazing at getting through buildings. The E-Drag is D tier, I think mostly because it's not very versatile. The decks it's used in, like Golem, it can get a pretty good amount of value, but I just think it's pretty clunky at 5 elixir, and you're just never going to be able to run it in cycle decks. Now, this might surprise you guys, but right now, I actually think the Electro Giant is D tier just because of all the buildings in the meta, and there's so many tanks right now, too, that are just better to use than the Electro Giant, which I'll get to those soon. The E-Spirit's going to go in A tier, just an incredibly valuable card for only 1 elixir, going to be very good inside of Hog, Expo, RG, you name it. I'd say the Archer Queen's A tier. I wouldn't quite say she's S tier right now, but she does get quite a lot of value. I would say one of the better champions right now, going to be very good inside of Hog decks, Mortar decks, and also bridge spam with the Evolved Barbarians. The Electro Wizard is C tier. I'd say just kind of an average card at the moment. You could use him in Giant Double Prince if you want to, or some bridge spam decks, but there's just going to be better options. The Elite Barbs are also going to go in C tier. I think they're overall pretty easy to counter if you know what you're doing and distract with cheap cards like the skeletons, the goblins, or kiting them into the other lane, but if you're low on elixir, then they can be kind of a nuisance. Right now, guys, I'm gonna actually say the Elixir Collector is B tier. You could argue it's C, but we've definitely seen a rise in Elixir Collector recently with Elixir Golem Pump, which is actually a good deck right now. Also, there's Goblin Giant Pump, there's Pumpo, there's Three Musketeers. All of those things are actually quite decent in the meta at the moment, which is why I would actually say it's B tier. And what might even come off as more of a surprise is right now the Elixir Golem is C tier because one of the best decks at the top of ladder right now is the Elixir Golem deck with the Elixir Collector, the Evolved Barbarians, and the Skeleton King. That deck is very solid, and for once, we're actually seeing Elixir Golem as a pretty decent win condition, so for that reason, it's an average card at the moment. The Executioner is also average now. It's very good inside of that new Drill Bomb Tower deck that we've been seeing, especially at the top of ladder. The Fireball is going in A tier. I don't want to say it's S tier right now, just because Poison and Arrows and other spells like that are also incredibly strong, so I think it's a very dominant spell, but not quite S tier. Firecracker is going to go in B tier. This is the regular Firecracker, not the Evolved. I still think the regular Firecracker is very strong inside of Hog decks especially, but you could also use her in other things too. Like, for example, she pairs really well in Recruit decks, especially ones that are just off meta, and you could kind of fit her in a lot of different things, so I think all around she's a pretty versatile card. Right now, the Fire Spirit I'd say is B tier. I think I usually put it in A, but at the moment I'm not really seeing it in too many decks, which is the main reason why I'm putting it in B. Fisherman's also going in B, mostly because it's only used inside of Royal Giant, but it's fundamentally a super strong card. 3 elixir, tons of king activations, pulling things away, all that good stuff. Flying Machine's B right now too. You could even argue it's A because of Recruit Hogs making a big comeback in the meta, but I think it's pretty easy to counter, especially with all the people in this meta running things like Fireball and just a lot of other air counters, so I think B is pretty fair. Could make the argument that the Freeze is an F with the clone, but I'm going to say it's slightly better just because Graveyard Freeze is not a bad combo in this meta. Furnace, on the other hand, though, is going right in F. I don't think I need much explanation there, it's just pretty bad. So this is an interesting one. The Giant got a range buff. I'm going to say it's still probably going to be in around D tier because I think the Goblin Giant and other tanks like that are likely going to still remain better, but things like Giant Graveyard we could definitely see making a comeback in this meta. That leaves us next with the Giant Skeleton, which I'm going to say right now the Giant Skeleton is C tier. It's kind of average. It's not really good at the moment. We haven't really been seeing a lot of Giant Skeleton decks, probably because a lot of the evolutions, like the Recruits and the Barbarians, just do so good against it. The Goblin Hut, I'm going to say, is F tier, alongside the Furnace. Just so much poison, Earthquake in the meta, it's not really going to be able to accomplish much. The Goblin Barrel is B tier. Logbait is pretty solid in this current meta. The Evolved Knight certainly helped redeem it. The Cage I'm going to put in B tier for 2 reasons. One, because the Cage got a health buff, so it actually, you can't instantly lightning it anymore. That'll put into perspective how it's a little bit stronger. It has more health that's going to change some interactions, and also because Recruit's Hogs are going to be very strong this meta after the Bomb Tower nerf. So those two things combined definitely going to put it as an above average card in B tier. The Drill, on the other hand, I'm going to say is C tier. Even though it's good in that one deck with the Executioner and the Bomb Tower, I still do not think it is a super solid win condition right now in this meta. I think there's just a lot of better options than it. The Goblin Gang, I'm going to say, is A, ever since they added that third Spear Goblin back. I think it's one of the things, too, that revived Bait, along with the Evolved Knight, because the Goblin Gang just pairs amazing inside of Bait decks, just does a lot of DPS for 3. A Goblin Giant's going in A tier. I don't think it's quite S tier, because I personally don't really know if the Goblin Giant needs a nerf. I know some people think it needs one because especially there's some people who don't like the card or playing against it. Maybe you could get like a 2% or 3% health nerf, but personally, I don't think it is that broken, but this could be one that's kind of debatable, so let me know if you guys think the Goblin Giant should get a nerf or not. The Goblins, on the other hand, though, I'm going to say are S tier, because they do so much DPS for 4, and they can fit well in so many decks, especially cycle decks with the Miner, the Hog Rider, Mortar, things along those lines. Now, the Golden Knight, I'm going to say, is the worst champion in the game right now. I'm going to say it's C tier, which may be a bit of a shocker, but its range got nerfed, so it's pretty much unusable without the Tornado. And if you look at the decks that have the Golden Knight right now, it's pretty much that one deck with the Executioner and the Drill, and so for that reason, just one deck. I can't really put it much higher than C tier. Golem is kind of decent right now. It's definitely better than the Electro Giant. I'm going to put it in B tier. B might be a little high, but the Golem pump deck with the Skeleton Dragons is pretty dang strong right now, so I think B tier is kind of justified for the Golem. Maybe C, but it's either B or C. Graveyard is for sure going in A. In fact, this is borderline S tier. Just for some background, Graveyard finished #1 in the world last season. Splash Yard, you know, the deck with the Tombstone, the NATO, the Poison, finished #1 in the world, so it is easily right now a top 3 win condition in the game, without a doubt. I don't know if it makes S tier, though, because I do think it does have a lot of counters, especially like the Mother Witch, and also Goblin Giant decks in general can be a little tricky to beat with it. The guards are going to be C tier. I think the Goblin Gang just replaced them in pretty much every deck they were in. Heal Spirit's also going in C. The worst Spirit, but it's still pretty solid inside of Bridge Spam and Goblin Giant, don't get me wrong. Right now, I think the Hog Rider's A tier. There were a lot of people at the end of season running the Hog Rider with the Tesla, so the Bomb Tower nerf isn't even going to affect Hog, in my opinion. Pairs very well with the Firecracker and, you know, her evolution. I just think all around, very good, consistent win condition, so I think it's pretty deserving of A tier. Hunter's C tier right now. It's mostly only good inside of Royal Giant, and Royal Giant isn't anything too crazy right now, so I think it's just right around average. Now, the Ice Golem got a small buff, but I'm going to be real, I don't think it did a whole lot. I'm going to say it's probably the low end of C. I mean, it could even still be D, but I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt. It definitely did get a small buff with the slowdown effect. I just don't think it's going to be anything too crazy, especially when we go to the next one. We got the Ice Spirit. The Ice Spirit is just so much better at slowing things down for one less elixir, so that is why the Ice Spirit is going into S tier. Now, the Ice Wizard, I'm going to move up because I think last time I put it in D tier, but let me tell you, if Splash Yard finished #1 in the world last season, there's no way I'm putting the Ice Wizard in D tier, because if a deck finished #1, that obviously means it's very good in the meta, and the cards in the deck are very good, so that with that logic, that's the reason I'm putting it in C tier. I just think defensively, he is super solid, and even though he dies to Fireball, Fireball's 4 elixir, he costs 3, therefore you're still getting a lot of value with him, even against Fireball and Poison decks. So the Inferno Drag is going to go into A tier. It was actually a card that was borderline, like, potentially going to get a nerf. Along with the Balloon, they ended up surviving that nerf, though, and so they're going to, of course, remain very strong. The Inferno Drag is going to be very good against the tanks, especially. Inferno Tower is going in B tier. In this recent meta, we've seen kind of an increase in Inferno Tower. I'm seeing some people run it with Hog, and then, of course, we already knew people are playing it with Bait, and then even people like Remieli have sometimes ran Inferno in their deck instead of Bomb Tower, just because they got pissed from all of the like Lava Hound and stuff like that they're reversing. So the Inferno, it might even be better this season after the Bomb Tower nerfs. Some people might be switching to the Inferno. The Knight, and this is just the regular Knight, I think is A tier. Right now, he's just getting so much value for only 3 elixir. A lot of people are running him in their deck because of the evolution, but I think even just without the evolution, he has so much health for 3. So this is a bit of a tricky one because the lava did just get a nerf, and I do think a 6% health nerf is pretty substantial because keep in mind, guys, a 6% health buff is what brought the Goblin Giant from D tier all the way to A tier. So for that reason, it's pretty safe to say the lava is going to be in B tier. It moves down a tier from A. I think the balloon is going to be a bit better than the lava now after the nerf. So I think B tier is pretty fair for the lava. There's no way the lava is going to be dead. Like, it's definitely not going to be in D tier, but we might even decide it'll be C. But I think B is pretty good for now. So the lightning is actually not that good. I think right now it's C tier. The reason why is just because of the current meta. The evolved barbarians and the recruits are one of the primary reasons why there's not really that much lightning, just because they don't get any value against those kinds of decks. So it's kind of like it's an instant loss if you're playing against the evolved barbarians or the recruits if you have lightning. So you're better off just not using it, which is why we're not seeing it a lot right now. The log is going in S tier, just the most consistent spell of all time. Even through all the nerfs, no surprise, it just survived through a lot of them, because it's pretty much a requirement inside of cycle decks. You're obviously going to run it way more than the snowball or the zap, stuff like that. So the lumberjack is kind of an interesting one. I'm going to say right now, it's C tier. It is going to be pretty good inside of Golem. But besides Golem, not really seeing it a ton because Lumberloon Freeze isn't really a deck that's good, that is that good in the meta. So C makes sense to me. Magic Archer's going in B tier. After the nerf he got, definitely was a pretty noticeable nerf. I mean, a first attack nerf, that's something you're going to notice like every time he's retargeting. So that's going to bring him down from S A tier to B tier, so he's still going to be a solid card. I'm sure the Remy Ellie deck is still going to be pretty solid, but he's just going to be a little weaker, which I think is fine, because he was pretty broken for a pretty long time. So the Mega Knight, I'm going to say, is D tier. I think he's pretty bad. I would definitely say, at the moment, a below average card, without a doubt. So I definitely going to stick with that decision there. Mega Minion, I'm going to say, is D tier as well, just because you got things like Phoenix and Inferno Drag that are just way, way better. The Mighty Miner is going in A tier. I actually think the Mighty Miner may be the best champion in the game right now. I don't think those, a bit of a spoiler alert, I don't think any of the champions right now are S tier. That's just how broken the evolutions are, just to put that in perspective. The Miner, without a doubt, is A tier. Just every meta, it seems like it's always very good inside of Lava. Of course, going to be very good inside of Mortar, going to be good inside of, Minor Poison. You see that deck with the Delivery and the Inferno, that Minor Control deck, that's very good against Lava, Sparky, and beatdown decks in general. A lot of people running that. So, very consistent card. Minion Horde is C tier right now because there's a lot of people running it inside of Mortar, and also you could use it, some people like to run it with Sparky, that giant Sparky bait deck. You could even run it in Lava. Some Lava players like to run Minion Horde and Minions in the deck as opposed to having the Skeleton Dragons. So it really just comes down to preference. It's going to be kind of the same with the Minions, although I would actually say Minions are B because they're very good inside of Sparky. Pretty much every Sparky deck with the Goblin Giant, for the most part, is running Minions, with some exceptions if you're running that Sparky variant with the Lightning and the Hunter, but I personally don't think that one is as good. The Mini P.E.K.K.A is also in B tier for that reason, because the Mini P.E.K.K.A pairs very well inside a Goblin Giant, and also the people running Giant Sparky 2 are typically going to be running the Mini P.E.K.K.A as well. Just a very high DPS card. Mirror's going in F tier. Really bad, don't need to say much more about it. You're spending more elixir to play the same card, which is generally not what you're going to want to do, and it's very situational, so there's sometimes you'll just get it in your hand, and it's like you're never going to use it the whole game or something just because the opportunity never comes up, so I just wouldn't use it. Mortar's going to go in A tier. I think it's one of the best buildings right now, even without the evolution. We're seeing it quite a lot inside of even recruit decks. We're seeing some people use it with, like with the Skeleton Dragons and the Skeleton King. Just a super, super solid defensive card. Usually survives pretty much every meta, kind of like the Miner does. Mother Witch is B tier right now. You could even argue that the Mother Witch is A tier. I'm going to say actually right now she's A tier. Most meta she's not, but just because in this current meta, there's a lot of people running things like Graveyard and Bats and stuff along those lines, and the Tombstone. She's very good against those things, so for that reason, I'm going to say right now she is A tier. The Musketeer, I also think, is A tier. You know what? I'm going to say the Musk is B tier. I kind of talked myself out of it just because the Firecrackers use just as much inside of Hogs, so there's no way I can say the Musk is A. Night Witch is D. There's a lot of people running the Mother Witch, which does pretty decent against her. Also the Poison, Delivery, stuff like that. See a lot of those things in this meta, which all do really good against the Night Witch. With that being said, though, she is really good in that Elixir Collector E-Golem deck, but that's one deck because Golem's not really going to run her. The P.E.K.K.A.'s not really that good. Makes sense because the Recruit's kind of hard counter the P.E.K.K.A., so you're never really going to see the P.E.K.K.A. being used much in a meta where there's a lot of Recruits. Poison's going in A as well with the Fireball. I don't think either Fireball or Poison are anything too crazy to where I think they deserve S tier. I think they're both, very strong spells at A. Prince is going in D. I just think there's not a single meta deck that requires him. I mean, you could use him in Rascal's Bait, Giant Double Prince if you want, but both of those decks aren't anything too crazy. Princess is D tier because she's just good in Log Bait, but don't get me wrong, in Log Bait she can feel absolutely broken sometimes. Rage is B. I think right now Rage is actually one of the best small spells. It, without a doubt, is better than Snowball and the Zap. And it's not far off, I would say, a Barb Barrel. It's part of the reason why I think a lot of Goblin Giant decks are very good. It just gets a lot of value, raging everything up, and it deals damage too on top of that. The Ram Rider right now, I would say, is C tier. I would actually say, you know what, she's probably D tier right now because people are using the Battle Ram over her for sure. The Rascals, I'm going to say, are C tier. Their buff helped them a lot, but they're just not versatile enough. No one's running them in Mortar. They're only used in Bait. But when they are used in that Bait deck, sometimes they carry the deck. Rocket's going in C. It's kind of around where Lightning's at right now. Even though Rocket got that nerf, and it was for D in a while, I feel like right now, there's actually a decent amount of people running Rocket, of course, in Log Bait, but even in Minor Control, you're seeing Rocket used, or even the Drill Executioner deck. Some people are preferring to use Rocket over the Fireball. Now, a large part of that is probably because there's more Sparky inside of the meta, but still, Rocket is pretty average right now as a card overall. The Delivery, I'm going to say, is in B tier. This is one of the best metas we've had in a while for the Delivery. Usually it's at C or D, but it's just getting a lot of value against a lot of these swarmy decks, and it's just a very good defensive card that's going to pair very well with the Inferno and the Bomb Tower, which are two good buildings in this meta. The Ghost is B tier. Usually I have it in A, but right now there's not a lot of people running RG or P.E.K.K.A., so for that reason, it doesn't really make sense to have it higher than B when we're only seeing it in Bridge Spam for the most part right now. Next up, we got the Royal Giant. Usually I have the Royal Giant in A or B tier, but in this last month or two, the Royal Giant has kind of really struggled in the meta just because there's a lot of other win conditions that are a lot better, and also because of the evolutions like the Evolved Recruits as well as the Evolved Barbarians, as you would guess, just absolutely stomp on the Royal Giant, making it very difficult to get him to the tower. Whereas the Royal Hogs, on the other hand, they're going in B because they're very good with the Recruits. And here's the Recruits. Now, these are the regular Recruits. The regular Recruits are B tier, but remember, at the end, I'm doing the evolutions. Skeleton Army is going in D tier. I think it's pretty bad, especially with all the spells in the meta that counter it so easily, like Log, NATO, Poison, and even stuff like Mother Witch. Now, that's kind of similar to Skeleton Barrel, but I have to say, Skeleton Barrel is definitely a bit better than the Skeleton Army right now, because in Recruit spam decks, the Skeleton Barrel is quite good. Those Recruit decks that you see either with the Dark Goblin or the Firecracker and the Mighty Miner and all that spam and bait stuff added in between, the Skeleton Barrel can be kind of obnoxious in those decks. So right now, it's kind of an average-ish card. Skeleton Dragons, at the moment, believe it or not, are A tier. They went from being one of the worst cards in the game to one of the best, because think about it. Right now, you see a lot of people using them in pretty much every lava deck. You can also use them inside of Golem. You're seeing them with that Golem pump deck. They're inside of Mortar. So you're seeing them in cheap decks now and expensive decks like Golem and Lava. So you're getting way more variety out of them, and the health buff definitely significantly helped them. Skeleton King is also going to go in A tier. I think it's one of the better champions, up there with the Archer Queen and the Mighty Miner. The Skeleton King is just going to pair very well with stuff like the Tombstone, and also in that Elixir Golem deck I was talking about with the Night Witch, and also inside of Mortar. I'm actually, guys, going to put the skeletons in B tier. Usually I have them in A, but I think goblins are a lot better than them right now. But here's the thing. These are the regular skeletons, not the evolved. I'm going to be real, guys. I don't think the Snowball buff or rework really did anything. I still think it's D tier. Some people are even saying the Snowball got nerfed, because what they did is they increased the slowdown, but they nerfed the damage at the same time, which changed some of the interactions for the damage. So in my opinion, they shouldn't have nerfed the damage. They should have just buffed the slowdown, and it would have been good. I'm going to say the Sparky right now is B tier. In my eyes, I don't think it's A or certainly not S. I know some people hate the Sparky, but I think the Sparky itself, in a lot of matchups especially, like if you have things like the Delivery, the Firecracker, or the Rocket, you're going to be able to stop it pretty easily, and I think the Goblin Giant is one of the main things kind of carrying it right now, so for that reason, I'm only going to have it as slightly above average at B. Spear Goblins, I'm going to have an A tier. I think they're better than the Bats right now, because the Spear Goblins are usually used in decks that have the Bats. Obviously the Miner, Wallbreaker, Poison deck, but then they're also in the Royale deck, which is a deck that doesn't have Bats, and then Spear Goblins you often commonly see too inside of Mortar decks, or you might see them in Rascal Bait decks as well, so they're just all around a very, very versatile card in a lot of those decks. The Tesla's B tier. I still think the Bomb Tower's a little better than it, but I think the Tesla right now is easily on the same level as the Inferno. There's a lot of people who are running Hog Tesla and were using it last season and preferred having it over the Bomb Tower, just so you have a higher chance of beating air decks, especially with all the balloon that we have going on in the meta. So the Three Musketeers are somewhat viable right now, but I still think they're average. There's no way I could really put the Three Musketeers higher than C tier, even though they're being used a little more right now, just because with all the Fireball and the Poison we got going on in the meta, and I also don't think the Three Musketeers are even that good. I think that the Evolved Knight is really helping them, because the Evolved Knight pairs very well inside of Three Musketeer decks. The Tombstone's going to go in A tier. Splash Yard finished #1 last season. It is by far one of the best buildings. You could even make the argument that it's better than the Bomb Tower and the Mortar. I think it's just it has a different mechanic to it. It's used in different decks than those cards, so all three of them are going to be very strong, and depending on the deck, one is going to be better than the others. Now, the Tornado, guys, I'm actually going to put in S tier, because like I said a couple times, Splash Yard finished #1 last season, so that kind of helps to prove my point, and it was very, very close to getting a nerf as well in the balance change vote. It barely slipped out of not getting one, and I just think it's been a very consistent spell for a long time, not just in Splash Yard, but also in things like the Royale deck. It's part of the reason why the Royale deck with the Magic Archer and the Bomb Tower have been so strong for a while, and also you even see new decks forming with the Tornado, like Goblin Giant Sparky. Some people are sticking Tornado in there, so you can kind of pull everything together and have the Sparky shoot everything. So it's just a card that allows for so many, like, just crazy interactions and just helps so many decks work. I'm going to say the Valkyrie's B tier. She's very good, but the Knight definitely a little better for one less elixir, and they both kind of serve a similar purpose anyway. The Wallbreakers are going in A. They are for sure one of the best win conditions in the game right now, not even in the Royale deck only, but also with, you know, the Poison Miner Wallbreaker deck with the Bats and Spear Goblins, and then of course you also have Recruits that you're sometimes seeing Wallbreakers used in instead of the Royal Hogs, so there's just a lot of different decks they fit in, and for only 2 elixir, they're pretty much no risk. You could literally go first play with them, splitting them at the bridge, and it's a very good play. The Witch is going in D tier. You could even make the argument that she's F tier, but I think the Wizard is worse, so the Wizard is going in F tier. You could give a buff to the Witch if you really wanted to, but I think they should prioritize the Wizard, because the Wizard has just been bad for such a long time, and I just think could definitely deserve a buff. I'm going to say the Expo's D tier right now. Maybe it's a little harsh. You could say it's C, but I just think no one at the top of ladder is really running the Expo at all. Even the good Expo players are really having a lot of trouble with, breaking through with it just because of all the tanks, the things like the Evolve Recruits and the Evolve Knight. Really quite a nuisance to break through when you're running something like Expo. So for that reason, I think it's one of the worst win conditions in the game right now, which is why I think D tier is pretty fair. Zappies are B right now. I was thinking they were kind of A for a while, but now that I think about it, the Zappies right now at this point in time, no one's running them with RG anymore. The only deck they're used in are the Recruits right now, so I feel like since they're only in literally one deck, B tier is a pretty good spot for them. They do get a lot of value on defense though. Zap is going in D tier. It's not really that good. I mean, it's good in lava, but even lava, sometimes you could use the snowball instead if you want to, and it's kind of the same as Sparky. Like Sparky, you prefer to use the rage, or a lot of people prefer to use the arrows. I just don't think it's really that good. It's pretty much unusable inside of cycle decks. The monk, I'm not gonna lie, is also not that good of a champion right now compared to some of the others. I'm gonna give it B tier though. I think it's slightly better than the Golden Knight. The monk is gonna be pretty good inside of bridge spam, RG, and also hog decks. I would say in competitive, the monk is probably a better card right now than ladder, but it's still pretty decent. That's gonna leave us with the Phoenix. The Phoenix, I'm gonna say, is A tier. I think it's a very solid card overall, even though it might not be as broken as it was before. You're seeing it still a lot right now. You could use it inside of course, lava if you wanted to. The deck you're also seeing it in a lot right now is with the Goblin Giant. There's that variant with the Lightning and the Hunter a lot of people are running. All right, so those are all the cards. Now let's get into the evolution rankings. All right, so these might change slightly because the meta isn't entirely formed yet because balances were only a couple days ago, but I believe the Evolved Knight is still going to be the best evolution in the game simply because of how versatile he is. You're seeing him right now inside of beatdown decks, even with things like Golem and Goblin Giant, which is pretty insane, and then every single cycle deck too, and then Control, like with the Graveyard, you're seeing him. So I don't think an 8% overall health nerf is going to affect him very much. I still think he is going to be the strongest evolution in the game, especially with his shield effect and also the increased hit rate and the damage. And the second best evolution, I'm going to say, is the evolved Royal Recruits. A lot of people were saying they were weak when they first came out, but I promise you guys, this season they are going to be so obnoxious to deal with because of the fact that the Evolved Barbarians got nerfed and also the Bomb Tower got nerfed, which were probably two of its biggest counters, and you have to take into consideration that the Goblin Cage also got a buff. So because all those things happened at the same time, you gotta believe that the recruits are going to be insanely strong this season. So I'm gonna say they're the second best evolution right now. The third best evolution in the game, going down from second, is going to be the Evolved Barbarians. Now, the nerf they got is definitely a little noticeable. With that being said, though, when you fireball the Evolved Barbarians, it still takes 2 shots from the tower after that to take them out, so there's not a whole bunch of interaction changing, but because they also got a small damage nerf too, along with a small health nerf, it's going to take them down to third being slightly worse and just slightly less oppressive, but I still think they're going to be incredibly strong, especially compared to some of the other evolutions. The fourth best evolution right now, I'm going to say, is the Evolved Mortar. Now, the next couple, they're a little bit kind of debatable. Like, you could argue the Evolved Mortar is fifth, but I'm just going to give it fourth. I think it's just very defensive, and the mortar itself is already a pretty strong building, so that boost to the stats, getting that goblin and the increased health and fire rate just significantly helps the card. So I'm going to say the Evolved Mortar is the fourth best. Coming after that, I'm going to say the fifth best evolution is the Evolved Firecracker. Even though she's the fifth best, you might be thinking that means she's not that good. She is still an S tier card. Easily. The Firecracker is insanely broken evolved, especially if you're running a deck where you don't have a spell to take her out. Like if you don't have Fireball or Poison or something like that, because obviously she doesn't die to arrows, you can be in a lot of trouble, and she can be quite a nuisance to deal with depending on the matchup. Now, this might surprise you guys, but next I'm going to say is the Evolved Skeletons. The Evolved Skeletons got a pretty big buff. Now that there's 8 in total, instead of the 6, that greatly helps them, and there's so many things you can do with them. You can abuse them so much when the other person doesn't have their small spell and cycle. You could do a 2-2 split in the back and then play something in front when they're coming in, 2 of them in both lanes, so you apply dual lane pressure with them and your opponent is forced to deal with both of them, or they'll end up getting skeletons on their tower. Trust me when I say this, guys, the evolved skeletons, you're going to be seeing them a lot more now that there's 2 more of them. That's going to bring us to the second worst, the evolved Royal Giant. Now, don't get me wrong, all the evolutions are very strong, but right now, because of the meta, especially with things like the evolved recruits and the evolved barbarians, the Royal Giant is just not quite as good as some of the other evolutions. And I'm even going to say the evolved Royal Giant is even barely outside of S tier right now, inside of A tier. And then that brings us to the worst evolution. Kind of a disappointment because they just came out and we were kind of excited to test it, but it's going to be the evolved bats. They just kind of suck. I mean, the healing thing doesn't even really matter because, first of all, the healing is not even guaranteed if they get taken out quickly. And even when they are healed, you just have to spend a little bit more elixir, or depending on the matchup, if you're against a deck that has a ton of splash, like let's say you're up against like a tornado deck, baby dragon, executioner, then the health isn't really going to help you at all. So that's my list. What do you guys think?